Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, Technical Agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator, and on this week's Field Friday segment, I wanted to touch on a couple things that are really showing up now in this corn. We obviously had a wind event go through and we had a lot of corn kind of blow down a couple of days ago, and I wanted to touch on that. Another thing that's really starting to show up now is a lot of these puckered beans again. You know, we've talked about this for a couple years. I'm out in a test plot here and you can see behind me some of these strips have some puckered leaves and some don't very much. So there is some genetic differences. The last couple years, you know, if we look at the things that are in common, you know, last year and this year, for instance, last year we were really hot, especially the end of June, and we had a lot of stress from hot, dry weather. Well, we had that this year. Last year we sprayed a fair amount of dicamba in that late June time frame, mid to late June. So a lot of the discussion was, is there some atmospheric loading, some volatility, some things blowing around that we didn't think or went farther than we thought they might. Last year we weren't really sure. This year, with the weather the way it was, we sprayed virtually no dicamba. None of the sprayers had dicamba in since burn down, which was months ago. We really haven't had anything out in these fields as far as for it to get up and move or for physical drift. Yet we still have a lot of these puckered beans. The common theme here is the beans that are not puckered are the Extend Flex beans, the dicamba beans, and the beans that are puckered are the Enlist 3 beans. I don't think herbicide's a factor this year. It almost can't be, as evenly as these fields are puckered, which we saw some of last year, and the fact that I don't know if it was some type of a off-target movement. I don't know where it's coming from because we really didn't spray any because of the weather and the calendar date. The common theme though is that E3 trait, that Enlist 3 trait, is in all the beans that are puckered. There's lots of different genetics out here, lots of different maturities. They all kind of show the same thing. So I think what we might be looking at here, and I don't know, I'm not the expert genetically on this, but it almost would seem to me that beans that have that E3 trait might just do that kind of thing under some severe stress, which we've had 2 years in a row now. Late June and early July, we had these hot, dry winds. We all know it. A lot of stress, a lot of things were really struggling late in the afternoon. Leaves were turning upside down and struggling. And just like animals, just like humans, everybody reacts to stress differently. And I think we see that here. So what we saw last year and the year before, in general, it didn't seem like it had any impact on yield. Everything turned out fine yield-wise. But I think we want to make sure we understand what's going on out here and not point the finger the wrong way. And I think, you know, there's chances that were happening the last couple of years as we were pointing the finger at the wrong things. It might just be a reaction to Mother Nature. A couple of years ago, we didn't have the stress load and we didn't really see it as much. We did have some off-target drift that was more predictable. The patterns made sense. Those we could find. But when it's even all the way across the field from one end to the other, this field, for instance, is surrounded by non-dicamba applications for miles. So again, I think we just want to understand that, you know, things happen in Mother Nature and not everything reacts differently. That doesn't make the Enlist 3 trait any better or any worse. It's just different. And I think we just leave it at that. So don't worry about it. I think now that we've had some rains, this will grow through it. Soybeans like this is one, for instance. If I look back, you know, count back on the open trifoliates, how many of them are puckered? There's probably maybe 4 or 5 where the puckering starts to show up. Soybeans, probably with the weather we've had, might be throwing a trifoliate maybe every, let's say, 3 to 5 days. So if we've got 4, you know, you can say 12 to 20 days is kind of when this started, because the stress, when it happens, doesn't manifest itself until those trifoliates come out and you start to see some of this puckering going on. So it shows up later than you think on a soybean plant based on how it develops. So that takes us back to mid-June, and that's kind of when we were obviously starting to get into some of our heavy stress load. You can see with this plant, it's loaded with flowers, there's lots of branching. Matter of fact, the stress might have actually induced some auxiliary bud growth. I think it'll be fine. It's just going to look different on top here until we get a few, you know, get a week or two where we have some nice moisture, which we've had some rains now. We might see that disappear. So I wouldn't think I'd worry about it. It looks like we'll be fine, just like we have been. The other thing I'd touch on quick is we had this wind blow a lot of this corn down, especially in Lyon County, but the surrounding counties as well. I dug up a plant, or cut off a plant right at the ground level just to show you what it's done already. You know, this one was actually taken probably 36 hours after it blew down, 24 hours after it blew down. You really didn't really see it doing much, but you can see how much it's done in the last half day. Every one of these nodes is flexible yet, since we don't have tassels, and it's already bent itself back straight. You know, the bottom, well, this one maybe a little bit, but 1, 2, 3, 4, the bottom 4 nodes have already bent where that plant is going to be straight. There's going to be a gooseneck, and it's going to be, the seed was planted here. You're going to have a row that's 6 inches to the side of where it was planted in this particular case, depending on how the row direction ran, but shouldn't really bother anything, especially since we had rain with it. There are a few fields that don't have really much bending over, but the unfortunate part is some of those fields are the ones that have the worst green snap. If it bent over and is growing back straight, shouldn't really have any impact. If it's busted off, green snapped, laying on the ground and probably withering and drying today, obviously that plant's done. That's worse. So, you know, we'd all like to have things standing straight and not have a gooseneck, but I think it's far better than having it try and stand perfectly straight and not be able to handle a 70-mile-an-hour winds and snapping off like that. We are at a very vulnerable stage with the stage of growth right now here, getting towards tasseling for brittle stock. So let's just hope we don't have any more windstorms come through, because I think we still have a lot of risk here for the next few weeks. So just wanted to touch on a couple of things that's going on out in the fields today, and just kind of, you know, bring you some agronomics of what that means and what we could be looking at. So doesn't look like there's too much to worry about in most fields, other than if there's some more green snap, and there's probably undoubtedly a few fields that might have had some, but most of it looks like it gave it the roots, since we had rain come before the wind in most places. So that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.